This is going to be a very short video just looking at the Suetonius source that talks about the immediate aftermath of the Battle of Actium. So I've highlighted the source in two different colours because it overlaps between section B, which is what we've been doing, the fall of the Republic, excuse me, and section A, which are the Julio-Claudian emperors, excuse me, of which Augustus or Octavian is the first one. So the bits in pale blue are just some quite nice quotes talking about his actions in the kind of the rise to power. So the fact that he received honours and offices before his usual age. He was 19 when he got the consulship. He marched against Rome as the city was his enemy. So a nice quote about marching on the city. And that he'd used the army to take his power. Right, cool. So that's quite nice, straightforward evidence. We then, and hopefully, Suetonius jumps forward a little bit and talks about some powers while he was emperor. So they're not relevant to section B in the slightest, to be honest, but they're quite handy for when we do Augustus. So he was consul for once more than 10 years later. Again, a year's lapse into consulships in the future. Sorry. He has quite a few of them, which are listed in here, and then he talks about his adopted son. So in your source book, label this for kind of talking about section A. It doesn't really need much explanation in the source. It's really straightforward. This whole section here as well is about just his consulships that he held. Nothing particularly interesting. Again, all during when he was emperor. And then we jump backwards, hopefully, and Suetonius talks us through his actions during the Second Triumvirate, hence why it's in pale blue. So again, this is some really nice kind of overview of all the stuff that we have done. So the fact that he was in the member Second Triumvirate for 10 years, officially designed to restore the state, fine. Do you remember that the Second Triumvirate was legal? It was passed into law by a tribune and was renewed every 5 years. So that's why it has a specific design to be restoring of the states. While he initially didn't like the proscriptions, he then was really ruthless when he did it, and that sort of obviously, as mentioned previously, met the end of Cicero. So that's fine. He then, so I'm just reading what it all says, talks about the fact that Lepidus, who's a member of the Triumvirate, wanted to sort of justify their actions, and therefore was hoping not to have to kill anybody afterwards. But Augustus, helpfully, Suetonius calls him Augustus here. Augustus is Octavian. It's the same person. On the contrary, consented to the end of prescription only if you be given a free hand in the future, which is kind of showing, like, according to Suetonius, that Augustus, Octavian, was clearly quite power hungry and was a little bit unpleasant. And that's what this section here talks through, is some of Octavian's particularly unpleasant actions during the Triumvirate. Now, when we go on to section A and looking at the propaganda that was published after Octavian sort of became emperor, you would think everybody absolutely adored Octavian. So this is quite a nice source for that counter-argument. So Augustus, as triumvirate, as a member of the Triumvirate, was universally detested for many of his actions, which is a little bit harsh, but probably an element true. So it talks about some examples where he's giving very different speeches and he sort of seems to overreact. So that he is giving a speech and there was this guy here who's not particularly important. So Octavian thought he was overly inquisitive, so he was taking a little bit too much interest. Took him for a spy and had him stabbed there and there, which is nice. There was another guy here, Aether here, who was going to be a consul, and he threatened him so much that the consul-elect then killed himself, which is also not very nice. We then have this guy here, Quintus Gallius, again, not particularly interesting, who was has some writing tablets in his robe. Augustus thought he was holding a weapon. He then was dragged away to be tortured, and during the torture process, Augustus tore out the man's eyes with his own hands, lovely, before ordering his execution. So this is going to be very different from the image that Augustus is going to put forward in the propaganda. I know I said that I really like Augustus, but I think he's amazing, and Octavian, the same person, is amazing. I am well aware that Augustus Octavian did some pretty unpleasant things as well. So this is some quite nice evidence for Octavian just being pretty unpleasant, to be honest. And you can use that in section A or section B. That's quite handy. And then we have this whole section here, just scrolling down, which is all to do with when he was emperor, which is a bit frustrating. So without kind of going into massive detail, it gives you some idea of his level of power. So he was granted powers of tribune for life. He acted like a censor, which is what this bit's talking about. Interesting quote that we'll use when we're talking about the restoration of the Republic is the fact that he considered restoring the Republic but chose not to. In fact, he was able to summon the Senate and sort of report to them about the overall state of the empire, shows his level of power. He realised that if he gave power away, then he would be in danger, so he decided to retain power in his own hands. That's a really handy quote for section A. And he said that he was creating this new form of government. Fine. And then down here it talks about him rebuilding the city, so he adorned it, so he rightly boasted he found as brick, he left as marble, which could be a metaphor as well about the restoration of the Republic, in inverted commas, and that he'd secured it for prosperity. So none of the bits on my screen here in olive, I don't know what this colour is, officially olive, can be used in section B, in the Fall of the Republic, because it's out of scope. It's after the Battle of Actium. But the exam board put it on with the same stuff, which is really frustrating. But here we are, anyway. But it does kind of show this kind of long-term impact and the fact that Octavian was able to become the sole ruler of Rome, etc., etc., etc. So when you're highlighting this, do the same thing. Highlight it in 2 different colours to show the difference between the stuff you can use in section B, Fall of the Republic, and the stuff you can use in section A, which is to do with the emperors.